Hello, wonderful Hidden Heritage listeners. The astute amongst you may notice that I'm not Violet, I'm Georgia. I am a student at Birmingham University, currently studying history of art, which is a subject that I've loved forever. I'm fascinated in art and culture and history and especially architecture. A couple of months ago, I applied for an internship at Heritage Explore, and I was thrilled when Violet asked me to come along. Today, I will be taking over from her to find out more about this amazing new platform, Heritage Explore. And Hidden Heritage listeners, don't worry, there will be some amazing recommendations at the end of the podcast, so stick around. But before we get to that, Violet, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, and thank you, Georgia, so much. But it's very strange being in the seat opposite you, and you're in charge. You're asking the questions today. But yes, as you said, I'm the founder of Heritage Explore and the host of Hidden Heritage, the podcast. I'm 30. I know that no one likes to talk about their age. I'm very open about talking about my age. We all grow old. But I grew up in Leicestershire at a place called Belvoir Castle, spelt Belvoir. It crowns the hill, the most beautiful hill in the heart of the country, Leicestershire. I grew up there as the eldest of 5 siblings to my mum and dad, who to me are just mum and dad, but they are the Duke and Duchess of Rutland as well. And I grew up, watching them work really hard to turn Belvoir around when they took it over in 1999 from my grandparents. So one could argue that was the seed of inspiration, like watching them work really hard for the last 25 years at sort of turning Belvoir around. The last 10 years I've spent in marketing, working for a number of different companies before setting up my own in 2019. I had a wonderful marketing agency, and on the side I created something called Duchess, the podcast, which to our Hidden Heritage listeners, they will be familiar, or a lot of them they'll be familiar with Duchess. It was a phenomenon, really, and it was not meant to be a phenomenon. We had no idea it was going to be such success, but the idea was to basically put my mum in front of the microphone, who's a great conversationalist, and draw stories out about these incredible historic houses that pepper the country into a modern medium, which was podcasting. So created that for a good 3 years on the side of my agency. And then really I suddenly thought, hang on, I think there's more we can do in this sector, this independent sector of heritage. There's more that can be done to really ignite and inspire that, particularly that younger generation, to seek out these places for whatever reasons that might be. That led me to creating Heritage Explore. And Heritage Explore is the first place in which and on which you can find all of the independent, well, in time, you'll be able to find all of the independently owned historic houses across the United Kingdom. Now, I say independently owned because a lot of our listeners will be familiar with the National Trust and English Heritage, which is the public sector of heritage in this country. But actually, there's nearly 1,500 other historic houses, which everyone can visit at different times in the year. But I set out really to bring together the independent sector of heritage for the purpose of more people discovering these incredible places more effortlessly, more easily, and hopefully one day making their own visit to them. But that's just the beginning. We're only at the early stages. We only launched Heritage Explore a month ago, and there's so much more to come. But you have to start somewhere.
Amazing. Violet, can you tell me what inspired you to create Heritage Explore?
Yeah, so Heritage Explore was inspired by, for 3 years, I travelled around the country with my mum making the podcast Duchess. And we were on the road in between her very busy schedule, my very busy sort of life running my old marketing agency. But we were making this amazing show that we so enjoyed doing together and with the team. What was really interesting is that as we were travelling around the country making and putting out these episodes of Duchess, it became really apparent to me that actually an enormous number of domestic and international people that were listening to the podcast, 50% of our audience was in the US, had no idea about some of these incredible historic houses that featured on the show. What happened really was that we kept getting emails from all over the world and in the UK from people saying, how do we find out more about this house? How do we go and visit it? How can we and where can we make our booking? And it was really interesting. People that lived 10 miles away there's an amazing house called Traquair that is joining Heritage Explore later this year, but it's in the borders. It's such a hidden, fascinating gem. And they came on the podcast, and I remember we literally must have been inundated with 200 plus emails about Traquair.
Wow.
Because people had never heard of it, and they lived half an hour down the road from Edinburgh. I found it so telling, and that really also inspired me to be like, hang on a second, all of these hidden gems that even I didn't know about, I had to discover them myself with research before inviting them on the podcast. And then I just kind of naively assumed that everyone else knew where they were, what they were, that you could go and visit them and see them for yourself. And so that really was an enormous seed of inspiration for Heritage X and making these places more accessible on the days that they're open. And I realized actually that all independent historic houses face a similar challenge at being recognized, being seen. We live in a very loud and noisy world with, number of different things trying to make demands on our time. And time is the most precious thing that we have. And actually, for a single independent house to try and get its head above the parapet of noise, it's difficult. But I'm a huge believer in the power of a collective, the power of a cooperative. I believe that there's strength in numbers. And so we created a strength in numbers with the podcast. We had 50 episodes on the podcast, 50 different houses. And I could see what that was doing. It was creating this amazing interest in the independent sector of heritage. And then I suddenly thought, well, I want to take this one step further. I want to make it more accessible for people to actually discover when these places are open, discover what's going on behind their doors or on their land, and then ultimately find them and seek them out and make a booking to them. And so we've built Heritage Explore with a really simple ambition initially, which is let's bring all these independent historic houses into one centralized platform, like make the platform as colorful and as vivid and as storytelling and as content driven as possible to really inspire people to enjoy them for themselves, hopefully, but also enjoy them from the comfort of their own home. And obviously my background was in marketing for 10 years. So I could see as well that there was this incredible demand and love and interest for heritage on our silver screens. If you look at, the money that Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV are piling into series like Bridgerton, The Crown, The Gentleman, you name it. And it was being devoured by people all over the world. And yet no one was actually then ensuring that people knew how to find these places and go and visit them for themselves. And my mum, I can't not acknowledge the impact and influence that she's had on me. She's been my absolute inspiration from day dot, really. I think as I've grown up, I've realized that actually she really has been such a seed of inspiration with what she's done with Beaver uniquely and independently. Really, it really, really, really was in a very, very bad state when we took it on in 1999. Mum, with her incredible team at Beaver, have just done such an amazing job to turn the ship around. And I think watching that, I felt so inspired by, how hard they've grafted. And I just don't see why the independent sector of heritage should have to graft so hard to survive. I really want them to thrive, not just survive. And I think I want Heritage X to be their engine room. Maybe this is a new tagline. The engine room for historic houses and the kind of AA, like yellow pages for visitors, be it domestic or international. And hopefully for young people, the compass to finding some identity. And if we can do those three things, then we're onto a good thing. But Mum's been a huge inspiration as well.
I'm sold. Now, you and I know what Heritage Explorer is,
yes.
But for those who don't, could you explain what this platform is?
Yes. So as I kind of just alluded to then, Heritage X we started out with the ambition to be a one-stop shop for all things independent historic houses in this country that are not part of the National Trust in English Heritage. We've got much bigger and bolder ambitions. So we've gone live with 25 houses. We will be onboarding more and more houses as the year goes on. But for me, I'm also really excited about making the on-site experience of these places far more interactive, far more intuitive, far more exciting. And so we've got really big and bold ambitions to integrate AI into the consumer experience, the visitor experience through our platform. So instead of your options only being at the moment when you go around a historic house, your options are a tour guide who we love, who has all the stories, but sometimes can be a little slow, maybe talks a little bit too much. If you're a family with young children, that's not that accessible. All the other option is a guidebook, and that's dense text and that's still images. And we don't live in an era of dense text and still images anymore. We live in an era of sound bites and videos. So I think what I'm looking to do with Heritage X is really develop the on-site experience of these historic houses and do it for all of them, not just for, the ones that have the potential or the capacity or the budget or whatever it might be to do so. I really want to be Heritage X to be the engine room for these houses, to get their stories, their history out to more people. And then also for our visitors that come through Heritage X, I really want them to have the best experience of these places, because there is so much that you can get from them, but you just need to kind of know how. And if we can inspire that and help people find these places and seek them out, I'm delighted. So all of that kind of on-site development of experience is happening later this year, but AI, audio tours that we're going to have through the platform as well, with really interesting characters. So there's a lot to come. So Heritage X in one line really is a one-stop shop for all of your heritage experiences, your wants and your desires at and in heritage. So we are where you can discover more houses that you had no idea some of them exist. Everyone's heard of Blenheim. Very few have heard of Leomani Tower, but they are in equal parts fascinating to go and see. We're where you discover us, plan your trip, and then make your booking to them all in one place. And as I said earlier, it's not just about the history. If you're not into history, it's about the landscape, it's about the gardens, it's about making sure you know where the best local pub is down the road for a great pint after you've finished your day walking around a historic house. That's what's important. And that's what I want to pull together into one place for people to get the best out of their trips.
Yeah, it is a really exciting time for Heritage Explore. Can you tell me what your hopes for the future of Heritage Explore are?
Really want to empower and excite, that younger generation who I think that there is most definitely a mental health pandemic in this country, particularly amongst that younger generation. And I really believe that these historic buildings, and not just the buildings, but the landscape, the gardens, I really believe, where else can you go in the country where you have a historic building, architecture, an incredible art collection, and then the most beautiful landscape, the most incredible gardens, adventure playgrounds, cafes, restaurants, farm shops. Like these historic houses are lighthouses that sort of light up the country. And actually, I really believe that they can become places of solace for more people, and particularly younger people. And I really want them to be. And if we can encourage more young people to seek out big open spaces, because it does have this sort of subliminal effect on us all. So that's one of my personal hopes for the platform. And then I'm enormously excited, as I touched on, about the integration of AI into heritage, building large language models, which sounds very technical, which it is, but basically creating these amazing ways in which, instead of having a tour guide or a guidebook, you can actually interact with the history. Because the things that pique your interest, Georgia, and the things that pique mine when we walk into the Great Hall at Blenheim are going to be very different. You might pick out the pillars, I might pick out the cross stone floor, and actually and I might have questions about that, and you might have questions about the architecture. And at the moment, you have to go and find the guide and ask them questions. I want you to have that in your hands, and I want you to feel like empowered when you go around these places to ask 100 questions and really come out thinking, God, I really learned something from today, outside of just seeing great beauty, which these buildings and these landscapes are. So that's very exciting. And then we're launching Heritage Explore Luxe, which will be later this year, which will be private tours and private experiences at these historic houses across the country that people can join the waitlist for, and then ultimately, become a member of a particular group or a particular experience and attend that very special, unique kind of one-off event. So really exciting.
Yeah, very, very exciting. Violet, can you tell me what your favourite feature on Heritage Explore is?
Yes, I have two. One of my favourite features, which is not my brilliance, it's William's, our CTO's, who had 9 years at Google, so has got all the experience in the world, but it is essentially the ability to book multiple places. So, if you're someone that really loves, if you're coming over to the UK, let's say you're an international visitor, coming over to the UK, you know that you don't want to see one, but you want to maybe see 4 houses. Right now, you've got to spend an awful lot of time looking out for and sort of discovering lots of different places. And then you've got to sort of book your visits to them individually on their different sites. You've got to see which times they're open, which days they're open, which all differ. You've got to compare. One of them has a car park, the other one doesn't. There's so much kind of comparison. None of it's intuitive. So what I love about Heritage X is that we've built it with that in mind, and we've built it for people to really hopefully empower people to see not 1 but 2 houses, because a lot of the time actually these houses are quite close to each other. You'll find in the Midlands, which is where you're from and where I'm from, there's 6 or 7 houses in the space of 15 miles of one another. And if you're coming over to this country as an international visitor and you really want to make the most of your trip, then I want to make sure that we can ease your journey at discovering these places, and then ultimately you can make multiple bookings to all of them in one place, which is and then our more recently developed feature, actually I do have 2 more technically, but one of them is the Heritage Explore map, which is exciting because you can see where all the houses are in the country. So again, for that domestic visitor who maybe has never been to a historic house and is thinking, how many are there really? Like, how do I actually get to these things? Where are they in the country near me? They can use the map and interact with it. You can zoom in, you can play with it. Hopefully in time, we'll make it way more interactive. I want it to be like, when you click on the map, I want it to pop up with, did you know the recent Firebrand movie was made here? Like the Jude Law movie that's just come out about Henry VIII was made at Sudeley. Sudeley Castle is one of the houses on our platform. It's just outside of Cheltenham. And I want that to kind of pop up when you click on the map. So the map is going to become more and more interactive, but that's an amazing feature. And then the other feature I love, final feature I love, is the ability, which we're again developing every day, but is the favoriting feature. So you as a user of HeritageX can now go onto HeritageX, create a login for yourself, and then you can save and favorite the houses that really pique or you like the look of. And then in time, hopefully in the next few weeks, we will have the ability for you to actually fully map out your trip at the back of the platform. So again, for that kind of visitor that's really wanting to make the most out of their trip here, or if you're a British visitor and you're traveling, I don't know, from the south up north to Scotland, and you think you want to stop and walk your dog, on the long car ride up to Scotland this summer, I want you to be able to use HeritageX as your sort of yellow pages book, basically, but for historic houses, and use us and like enjoy reading about us, enjoy the podcast and listening about these historic houses that are on the platform. They're my favorite 3. We've got so many more coming down the track, but they're my favorite 3 that are currently live right now.
That really is music to my ears, because I can find personally booking can be a really, really stressful process. And I've been burnt by double bookings and dodgy bookings before. But on HeritageX, it's just so easy, and it takes that kind of like anxiety away from something that should be really fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, music to my ears. What features on Heritage Explorer are people not using?
Good question. I think the map is maybe not being used enough just yet. Yeah, we've been doing lots of kind of thinking this week internally at HeritageX about and looking at what everyone is using and stuff. I think the favoriting hasn't been used an enormous amount yet. That did only go live a week ago. I think the main one for me is the multiple booking. And I think perhaps as we get the word out there more about HeritageX, it is really unbelievable at what close proximity so many of these houses are. And so I would always really encourage people, there's nothing like seeing 2 historic houses on the bounce, because you actually realize the beauty and the total uniqueness of them both. And I think the other thing that I love the most about the independent sector of heritage is that by virtue of still being in independent hands, each of them, it means that every single person that runs that house, that looks after it, that's the steward of that house, and their family has always been, they have a completely unique way that they look at their house to, let's say, the other house that's 10, 15 minutes down the road. And therefore, you get this, the scones and the tea room are never the same. The venture playground's never the same. The tour experience is never the same. Everything about your experience at an independent historic house is different to the next. And that's why I love this side of the sector so much, because there's nothing cookie cutter about it. Every family is different, and therefore every kind of ingenuity, idea, product that they build or design or have in their gift shop, everything about it is different. And so actually seeing 2 on the bounce is kind of an amazing thing. And as I said, like HeritageX is the only place where you can book 2 places really effortlessly. So that's got to be something that I think people use more of in the future, I hope.
I love what you said there about the kind of different design of these places. As someone who loves art history, I'm really interested in curation.
Yes.
And that's in galleries, but it's the same in these houses.
Absolutely.
I went to Burley recently, and they had this amazing videos of the different custodians of the house over time up on the walls, and I just would never have thought to communicate the history of the house through videos and people in these like amazing costumes. And so it's really exciting to see the individuality and the creativity of how these places run. So yeah, love that.
No, I love that. Love that observation.
As promised at the start of the episode, Violet is now going to give us her top 3 historic destination recommendations for the summer.
Well, it was really hard nailing 3 down, and they are just for the summer, because if they were for the year, it wouldn't be fair or true, because I just love them all. And as I said, they're all so individual and independent of each other, and that's why I love this world that we're working in so much. But my first will be Glamis Castle. So Glamis is located just outside of Perth. It's famous because the Queen Mother grew up at Glamis. It's also, to my mind, well, and my own personal experience, the most haunted castle I've ever stood in my life. And I have been lucky enough to stand in a few now with the podcast, Duchess, and then HeritageX. The chapel at Glamis is famously haunted by Lady Glamis, who in the 17th century was burnt at the stakes just outside of Glamis because they believed that she was a witch. She supposedly now haunts the chapel. There is a chair in the left-hand corner that is grey in colour, which is kind of fitting. Every other chair is kind of lovely sandy colour, and this one chair in the corner. And I said to Stephen, who's the CEO of Glamis, who showed me around very kindly, I was like, why is that chair grey in the corner? And he said, oh, that's Lady Glamis's chair. No one has ever sat on that chair ever since she was first sort of placed here or put here. And there are the most extraordinary tales of from the guides of their stories of seeing her, and it's staggering. And there's also an amazing video at Glamis of one of the ghosts playing with a broomstick, and it's an actual video on a phone that was taken 3 years ago.
Oh.
So it's kind of, Glamis is like fascinating and a little bit scary, makes the hair stand up on your neck. So that's got to be one of my favourite choices. They've got also some amazing events happening this year. If you're into that kind of amazing Scottish Highland music, which I know you are, Georgia, and like it's an incredible pick. Lamport Hall is my second recommendation. That is in Northamptonshire. It's run by the Lamport Hall Trust. It was put into trust in the 60s, and they do an incredible job as an independent trust, and it's just so beautiful. It's this incredible Georgian, staggeringly stunning house that sits squarely in Northamptonshire, which, as a fun fact for our listeners, is the most populated historic house county in the country. It has an amazing and very famous gnome that's featured at the Chelsea Royal Fair Show. Alan Titchmarsh has been photographed with this gnome. And it's famous because it was part, once upon a time, of, I think it's Sir Thomas's, who was one of the predecessors, custodians of Lamport. It was part of this kind of gnome world that he built in the gardens with his own hands at Lamport, which is sadly no more, but this gnome survives. So that's quite fun. But they have an amazing screening happening later this summer. I think it's in August.
3rd of August.
3rd of August, there we go. On the 3rd of August, they've got a Pretty Woman screening happening right in front of Lamport. And you can drive your car up. It can kind of be like a scene in Greece, you know, when they all kind of watch like the movies, you know, in their cars. It's sort of like that, but at a historic house. And this historic house is Lamport. And if you go to Lamport, go into the stables, go to the cafe, order yourself a brownie. I promise you will never, ever, ever regret it. And then the final destination, oh gosh, where am I going to pick? I think I might have to go with another place in Scotland, which is called Dunnottar. And it is a ruin, and it's famous. When you land at Aberdeenshire Airport, it is sort of plastered all over the airport because it's one of the most iconic castle structures, remains of a castle in the country. And it was a famous battleground. There's just something incredibly romantic about it. It's right on the peninsula. And the fact that the family that still manage it and maintain it today have managed to, and their team, Alex, they've done such an extraordinary job of not letting it fall into the sea. And it's just so worth seeing. It's really, really beautiful. And you really get this sense of, sometimes you can go to ruins and feel a bit sad that it's not intact. There's something about Dunnottar. It's like it was meant to become a ruin, and it's meant to be this kind of very staggeringly beautiful, just very, very special to see. So I think I'd probably say that. And that's great for, you know, people that love a good walk. You have to walk right down to Dunnottar. It is on the peninsula. So it's not for people that can't, you know, easily walk on tracks, but it's an amazing place to just go and see with your own eyes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Violet. It's been wonderful hearing you talk about Heritage Explore. As a young person, but also an art history nerd, it's really exciting to see a subject that I love brought into the 21st century with a digital platform. The social media is so dynamic and exciting and communicates so much about the subject that I love in a really accessible way to younger people. So because I love art history, I'm obsessed with the history and the heritage and the culture of Britain. Mm-hmm. But I've kind of had a bit of a battle with it. You know, for a long time, I felt quite disconnected to British culture. What is British culture? And I think for my generation, it's a difficult question to answer, and people feel kind of detached from what it means to be British. I went to Scotland recently, and I was so struck by the sense of national pride that is cross-generational. It's not just older generations. It's not your mum or your dad. It's everyone. I was walking down the Royal Mile, and there was this like bagpipe flash mob. And I was just struck by, there were people in their 60s, there were kind of like younger people, 30s, 20s, and then there were little children all together sharing in this piece of Scottish culture. And I think Heritage Explore could offer that to the rest of the UK and kind of give young people that sense of rooting and grounding in a culture and like identity of who they are, what it means to be British. So yeah, I am just so grateful that I could kind of be a part of this, and I'm really excited to see where it goes in the future.
Thank you. Well, Georgia, honestly, like you've been such a mega person to have at Heritage Explore at this very early stage. It really counts having great people that are smart, intuitive, inspired, inspiring around the business. And you are all of those things. So thank you so much for choosing to do 5 weeks with us. It's been amazing. And I've loved, this was your idea to do this podcast conversation entirely. So I love that it was your idea. And I think it's the most wonderful way to end, your final week. I hope we can achieve what you just described, because if we can, that would be an amazing thing to do. And hopefully helping people discover some form of rooting, grounding in their whatever they choose to be their heritage and their history. But if we can empower that, how wonderful. So fingers crossed, we'll do our best. But that's thank you so much for being a part of Heritage Explore.
Thank you.
And then the other thing we shouldn't forget, Georgia, is that listeners of Hidden Heritage get to use our special discount code, which is only going to be available for this summer. But it's HX24. And if you type that in when you check out on HeritageX, you will get 5% off your visit. So get booking.